I couldn't take my eyes off him, not when his hand trembled seeking support, not when the effort to breathe seemed to cost him every ounce of strength he had left. Instead of recoiling from that bloodied, vulnerable body, I felt a strange force pulling me closer, as if part of me already knew that only in that moment of raw pain would I find something I'd never seen in the cold halls where I was raised, the stark truth of human fragility. Each time my finger pressed the damp cloth against the deep cut on his shoulder, I heard the echo of my own fears, fear of failing, of getting my hands dirty, of exposing myself to the audacity of caring for a stranger. But there was also a fierce curiosity, a fascination with every line of his face, with the strands of hair plastered to his forehead by sweat and blood, so emblematic of battles that went beyond armor and swords. When he finally opened his eyes, I saw not just pain, but memories of wars, deserts, and comrades who abandoned him. And in that lost gaze, I recognized a silent guilt that gripped my chest with the same intensity as the pain I was trying to staunch. It was impossible to follow the protocols I'd learned in my etiquette lessons, those that demanded modesty and distance, because in that moment I wasn't a princess. I was someone capable of feeling pity, anger, and hope all at once, and as I wrapped his wounded arm with my steady hands, I realized that the simple act of choosing to care had the power to tear down barriers stronger than any wall. The internal barriers that protected me from the world, but now threatened to keep me from the boldness of loving someone in their most broken hours. Each time I carefully washed the dirt and blood from his wounds, I felt a mix of repulsion and fascination. Repulsion for the horror those scars carried, fascination for the strength hidden beneath that battered armor. He barely spoke, but I read his silences like one deciphers ancient letters. In every sigh, I uncovered traces of a story of pain, loyalty, and betrayal he didn't dare share. My hands trembled when I touched the deepest cut, but holding his shaking arm gave me a courage I didn't know I possessed, as if each drop of blood was also an invitation to break through the walls I'd built around my heart. I noticed for the first time how my breathing was tied to his rhythm, and how my pulse raced not just from the fear of mishandling the bandage, but from something older, more urgent, the impulse to protect him, to ensure that there, among those cloths and makeshift remedies, existed a sacred space where his pain could find relief. When I looked up and our eyes finally met, I felt a dizzying shock, a spark of mutual recognition, almost a silent call for us both to glimpse, in that intense second, a possibility beyond mere physical rescue. And in that wordless encounter, I understood. What drove me wasn't just compassion, but a deep attraction to his vulnerability, to the courage of a man who, though pierced by war's wounds, hadn't given up the fight. I was complicit in this discovery, aware that this act of care could be the first step towards something I'd never dreamed of living. The risk of loving someone as broken as I was, and yet together, finding a greater strength to remain. The warmth of my hands still trembled when I finished wrapping his arm with the last makeshift bandage, and it was there, with the cloth now free of bloodstains and my heart racing, that I realized nothing would ever be the same. Until that moment, I believed I knew my limits, thought I knew how far my compassion and courage could take me. But the simple act of keeping him close, of not handing him over to the cold care of strangers, showed I was willing to transgress all the silent rules I'd been taught to reign from a distance. As I removed my gloves, I searched his eyes for any sign of gratitude or pain, but found something far deeper. A silent acknowledgement from someone who, for the first time in a long while, allowed himself to trust a kind gesture without expecting immediate repayment. I felt a weight, the certain weight of the responsibility now resting on my shoulders, and at the same time, a strange lightness, as if by caring for him, I had also cared for a part of myself that had lain dormant for years. He exhaled quietly, and in that narrow sigh, I realized the bond between us was no longer just one of help and strangeness, but of an unspoken promise, the promise to face, together, whatever came next. I stood slowly, and for the first time, I saw my own reflection in his eyes, a princess without a crown, but brimming with emotion, ready to break the conventions surrounding her. It was in that moment, in the shared stillness between two slightly shattered hearts, that I knew this was the end of our Act One, an act that began with a groan of pain and ended with a pact of care and choice, a pact that thrust me with fear and hope intertwined into the intense field of what would come next. The days that followed were a slow dance of approach and retreat. He spoke little, and even when he ventured a word or two, it was as if each syllable cost more than all the blood spilled on the battlefield. But I no longer needed words. I began to observe his gestures with an almost devotional attention, the way his fingers clenched when pain came in waves, how his eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling for long minutes, as if searching the wooden cracks for a reason to remain whole. Caring for him ceased to be a medical act and became a ritual, not just of healing but of connection. And strangely, it was in his silence that I began to truly hear myself. For the first time in years, my days didn't revolve around ceremonies, gowns, dynastic alliances, or palatial duties. For the first time, I woke up thinking about what he needed, what I felt, the deep calm of simply being with someone who didn't demand any pose from me, just presence. And the more I surrendered to this new, unceremonious routine, the more I realized he was beginning to see me, not as the untouchable figure known in gilded halls, but as a woman of flesh, doubt, and impulse. There were moments when I caught myself laughing alone at small things, he said. Dry, sharp comments laced with the humor of someone who'd been too close to death. And in those brief, unexpected moments, I felt the possibility of a different, stronger love sprouting between us. But with this new feeling came fear, because as much as he was healing physically, I saw in his eyes that the deepest wounds were still open, and I wondered, in my silences, if I'd have the strength to handle everything that came with him, the weight of the pain he carried, the pieces that might never heal. Yet I stayed, and more than that, I wanted to stay. Even without knowing where it would lead, even without guarantees, because what was growing between us wasn't born of fantasy, it was real. And perhaps precisely because of that, it was already impossible to ignore. It was on a cold night, one of those when the wind seems intent on tearing the windows from the soul, that he finally spoke about what had shattered him inside. It didn't come as an outburst. It came as a weary whisper, heavy with pauses, as if every memory he pulled from his chest still had living thorns. He spoke of sword brothers who fell screaming for help that never came, of villages destroyed in the name of orders he no longer believed in, of promises made with honor and broken for survival. And listening to it all, I felt my heart wilt with pain, not just for him but for myself, for having lived so long surrounded by gold and veils, believing heroes always returned whole and the world could be saved with speeches. He didn't ask for comfort. He never did. But the moment he lowered his eyes, ashamed of his own pain, I reached out my hand. And it wasn't a gesture of pity. It was from equal to equal. Because there, without crowns or swords, we were just two wounded souls trying to recognize each other amid the chaos. From that night on, something dissolved between us. A final barrier fell, and with it came the risk of truly loving. I began to see in him not just the man fighting to stand, but the one who, even fallen, could still look at me as if I was something worthy of care. And that silent reciprocity, born without fanfare, began to consume me. I found myself thinking of him in every corner, in the empty castle corridors, during long baths, in sleepless nights. And the touch of his hand haunted my skin. The memory of his gaze flooded my thoughts like an unstoppable current, and while this filled me, it wounded me too, because loving someone still piecing themselves together is risking being cut by the loose edges of their pain. But I was willing to bleed if necessary, because for the first time, I didn't see love as a reward or conquest. I saw it as a choice, and I was already beginning, even without saying it aloud, to choose him, even knowing it could mean losing the little piece I still had. It was when the messenger arrived with the kingdom's seals that everything around me began to tremble. The letter was brief, its words too elegant to carry the weight of what they truly brought. My name had been cited in an alliance agreement between powerful families. A name not as a woman but as a piece. A princess not as a human, but as a trump card of blood and power. I took a deep breath, sitting with the paper between my fingers, and felt the world I'd built with him, fragile though it was, silent though it was, begin to slip like fine sand through my hands. It wasn't a surprise. I always knew this moment would come. But nothing prepares you for the exact instant when a love, once contained in the simplest gestures, is torn away by the force of duty. When I told him, the silence was absolute. He didn't shout, didn't protest, didn't ask me to stay. He just looked at me. With that look only he had, a mix of pain and acceptance, like someone who'd lost so much they'd learned not to hold anything too tightly. "I understand," he said. 3 words, and with them my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I wanted to scream that understanding wasn't enough, that I wasn't the same anymore, that my body remembered his touch, that my chest no longer knew how to breathe without him by my side. But I stood there, mute, with tears that didn't even fall, because part of me still clung to composure, to the crown, to what I'd been taught was worthy of a princess. The days that followed were confusing. He pulled away little by little as if making a point to ease my departure, and I cowardly allowed it. I pretended not to see, pretended it was better this way. But each step he took away from me was like another crack opening in the ground of my days. And when the night finally came, when I knew I wouldn't see him in the morning, I understood that something much bigger had been broken. My own idea of love as something that could be denied for the sake of duty. Because what I felt for him was no longer a choice, it was truth, and I was about to let it die out of fear of facing what they always said was impossible. The morning after his departure, I walked through the palace corridors like someone crossing a place they no longer recognize. Everything seemed in place, the red carpets, the silent servants, the heavy curtains blocking the light of the world outside. And yet, everything was different. Because where there was once structure, now there was emptiness, a kind of absence that wasn't physical but emotional, as if something essential had been ripped from me without warning, and I no longer knew how to inhabit my own body. I ran my fingers over every object, every edge, searching for an anchor but found nothing, no beauty, no meaning. I was exactly where they expected me to be, fulfilling every role I'd been taught since girlhood. And yet, I felt outside myself. It was when I saw myself in the mirror for the first time in days that I understood the depth of my own lie. The face before me was flawless, hair perfectly pinned, posture erect, expression neutral. But the eyes were dead, not from sadness, but from absence. It was in that moment I realized I was on the verge of losing something greater than my freedom. I was on the verge of losing myself, because it wasn't just about him. It was about who I became with him, about what I discovered in myself when I was by his side. He hadn't rescued me. I had rescued myself in his eyes. And letting this love go was renouncing everything I'd fought to achieve, my truth. I ran through the corridors with a desperation that didn't match the image I was always required to uphold. And for the first time, I didn't ask permission. For the first time, I broke protocol. The only thing that mattered was reaching the one who, even wounded, had shown me what it meant to be whole. And as I rode, with no certain destination, guided only by the urgency in my chest, a single phrase echoed within me with relentless force. I choose him, not out of rebellion, not out of impulse, but because, in a world that always told me who I should be, he was the only one who looked at me as if I were already enough. I found him at the edge of the forest, where the winds carried away the sounds of the world and everything felt raw, more real. He was facing away when I arrived, sitting by a low crackling fire, as if even the flames had learned to whisper near him. For a moment I said nothing. I just watched him, the way his shoulders stayed tense even at rest, as if always expecting an attack. The way his fingers fidgeted in the dirt, distracted, but with the weight of someone who never stopped carrying memories. And there, without him knowing I was there, I realized something that unraveled me inside. He seemed less wounded and more alone. When I announced my presence with a single "I'm here," he turned slowly as if not trusting his own senses. Our eyes met, and for an instant, everything stopped. There were no questions, no accusations, just two gazes carrying a sea of words neither of us knew how to say. "You came," he said, with a mix of disbelief and sadness. I nodded, swallowing the knot threatening my throat. "I came because without you, I went back to being what I was before. A name, a duty, a title, but not me." He stayed silent for a long time, his gaze lost somewhere between pain and hope. Then he answered with something that hit me deeper than any vow. "I never wanted you to give up everything for me, but I always wished someone would come back." That's when I understood he didn't doubt my love. He doubted the possibility of being chosen. Chosen not as a savior or martyr, but as a broken, imperfect, difficult man. And in that moment, I didn't need to promise anything. I just went to him, sat by his side, and took his hand firmly. Because sometimes love doesn't need declarations. It needs only the courage to stay. And that's what I did. Not because it was easy, not because I knew what tomorrow would bring, but because there, between his scars and mine, between the remnants of what we'd lost, there was still space for something new to grow, and I was ready to plant there. We didn't return to the castle, not that day, perhaps never. In that clearing, surrounded by wind and silence, I discovered that not every happy ending needs trumpets, thrones, or applause. There was there a freedom I'd never experienced, the freedom to represent no one but myself. For so long, I carried the name of princess, like it was a shield, a wall, a sentence. But by his side, I discovered I could exist without titles. I could be just a woman, just presence, just choice. That same afternoon, he took me to a hidden stream among the trees, where he used to hide when he was still a soldier. This was where I remembered I was still human, he said, and then sat, feet in the water, as if the act washed not just the body's dirt, but the soul's marks. I sat beside him, and for the first time, I rested my head on his shoulder with the lightness of someone who expects nothing more, just the now. We stayed there until the sky changed color. We didn't talk of plans, didn't swear eternities. We just existed, and that was enough. In the days that followed, we built a simple routine. Modest fires, silent meals, nights when words dissolved into slow touches, and days when even the most painful memories seemed to finally find a place to rest. I saw him smile for real, saw his eyes calm, and he saw in me something no one had ever seen. A woman who didn't want to save him, nor be saved just to be. And even knowing the world out there might never understand us, or that old duties could call us back at any moment, we felt no fear. Because the love we lived there had already conquered the impossible. It was born from pain, withstood fate, and bloomed among the shards. A love that didn't ask permission. It just stayed. Today, when I close my eyes and return to that time, I don't see castles or crowds. I see the outline of a body beside mine, the sound of footsteps on dry leaves, the smell of earth after rain. I see the man who asked for nothing but offered everything. The love I lived with him had no coronations or eternal promises. It had choice. And that's what makes it so sacred. We chose each other without certainties, without securities, with only the sincere desire to be each other's shelter. I was once a princess of a kingdom. Today, I'm the guardian of a story almost no one knows. A story of silence, healing, and two souls who met wounded and decided to remain. And if they ask me if it was worth leaving behind everything the world said I should be, I'll answer, with a smile no one else understands. It was worth it. Because in the end, the truest love isn't the one everyone applauds. It's the one that gives you back to yourself, even if everything else is left behind.